Hi, my name is Dr. Casey Paleos. I'm a psychiatrist, psychedelic researcher. Been involved with psychedelic research since I was a resident in training over 10 years ago now. At NYU, was a study therapist in the psilocybin cancer anxiety study there. And since then, psychedelic psychotherapy has kind of become my passion and focus in life. More recently, I've been serving as one of the principal investigators in the phase 3 clinical trial seeking FDA approval for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. I'm a study therapist in that trial as well. And just have a very strong interest in the use of psychedelics and other forms of altered states of consciousness in the service of healing and meaning making.
We are both also members of the Sound Mind Collective.
We are. We are
which
indeed.
actually got introduced to Alexan through you.
Yeah, we're both seekers. I think most of the people listening to this are probably also seekers.
Yeah.
One stripe or another.
And we've been seeking, our whole lives, I would say. I've known you now, I guess, since second grade.
Yeah, we were 7.
So that makes math on the fly. We almost 40 years we know each other, 37 years, something like that, 37, 36 years.
Yeah, it's crazy, but true.
Yeah, we are that old and we know each other that long. So I'm Pete Sachs. I am the founder of Chemistry Creative, a creative content and event production company based in Boca, New York. Among many other things, at Chem, we also proudly produce the Sound Mind Collective live stream events. I'm also a husband, partner, father, writer, and musician. I think also for the purposes of this talk and many other, I am a Dzogchen Buddhist practitioner and aspiring teacher in that tradition. For those of you who don't know, Dzogchen is a non-sectarian, non-dual Tibetan practice that is designed to point directly to our true nature, which is said to be inherently free and perfect. So Casey, we're here to have a conversation around the idea of resilience. All right, we at Sound Mind thought the topic was very important at this time. I think it's become clear that we are in a period of time that represents unprecedented upheaval for all of us, and a period that is just not going to magically disappear and go back to what was here prior. I think that's pretty safe to say. And I think that's where the topic of resilience sort of came up, as this is becoming obvious that this is more of a long distance run as opposed to a sprint. So, how can we be resilient and how can we still grow as beings, even as we face sort of considerable uncertainty? And who knows, maybe even we can even accelerate our growth through these unprecedented times. And I think having your expertise on this subject would help many of us. So do you have any thoughts on this, Casey?
Yeah, on resilience specifically, I know you mentioned this to me yesterday, and I've thought about it quite a bit since then. So to me, resilience really derives a person's ability to be resilient in life. And when we talk about resilience, what's implied there is resilience in the face of something, some stress, some adverse circumstance, and implied there is suffering, right? So we're talking about resilience in the face of suffering. I want to talk a little bit about, if I may, my wife Dana, who, as you know, has been suffering for quite a few years herself, really since stage of 2016, so 25 years now. She's been contending with an illness. It's muscle wasting pain, hypersensitivity syndrome, previously sort of undescribed to medicine, and which we've only really sort of been able to figure out through genetic testing over the last couple of years. But last 10 years, she's been in constant and sort of worsening pain throughout her body and loss of functioning. She can't work now, and she deals with an enormous, exorbitant amount of suffering that I have to witness every day, and yet she's one of the most positive and frankly radiant beings that I know, and I'm exceedingly blessed to have her in my life. And to be married to her. I mean, it's I can't really put it into words what she means to me and what sort of our shared kind of suffering sort of means. But I asked her to write a little bit about this, if I may, just kind of read to you guys a little bit about what she wrote. So she says, my survival has depended on consistently doing increasingly difficult new things I swore I could never do. From surgeries, experimental treatments, and medical procedures, to boldly facing my deepest psychospiritual trauma, to casting off the grim prognosis of allopathic medicine altogether. She goes on to say, I ultimately had to decide to fully reclaim my own agency. As Viktor Frankl said, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. So she goes on to say, I did these previously unthinkable things in the context of deep love for the people who matter most to me, and love for a cause so much greater than my own, specifically a chance to lend my voice and experience to a crucial healing paradigm shift. Our personal sense of meaning is the axis mundi that makes the impossible possible. We can have utterly excruciating experiences on a personal level, but these experiences end up gracing us with confidence and keeping us aligned with the noetic gravity of a larger purpose. Finally, she says, people often tell me they couldn't do what I've done, but I always reply, you might be very surprised, even shocked at what you're actually capable of. So, and so to me, this is what resilience boils down to. It's this idea that if you have a sufficient why, you can bear anyhow. And meaning, getting to the concept of meaning per se, to me, meaning comes down to connectedness. I mean, the meaning of the concept meaning is about connectedness. This thing is connected to that thing, right? And for a human being, I mean, because we are social creatures, we are these social primates, and it's sort of hardwired into us, the most sort of basic fundamental level, to seek out connectedness with other humans, to seek out love, essentially. And it's as essential to survival as food, water, air, all of those, it's as essential to our well-being as those other things. So
it seems like we're really seeing that right now, right? I mean, a lot of people are saying this, I think that they wouldn't normally be thinking that, right? I think with this mandatory separation that we've had to take, it's really starting to register to people that we can't take it. Yeah. So what you're saying is very, very salient for this moment. But please go on.
When we place all of the source of the meaning in our lives on external factors, we place ourselves in a precarious position.
And that, that ties in very well to the, Buddhist principles, right? Of attachment, right? And these are the actual causes of suffering. Many people have heard sort of the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth being translated, maybe perhaps wrongly, into life is suffering. Mm-hmm. Right. And what is meant by that is actual conditioned reality, duality, right? This and that, buying
self and
into
other,
that. Subject object, buying into that through ignorance and excessive attachment is suffering, right? And that's the cause of suffering. So what you say is very true, right? How do we find something even deeper than that, right? It doesn't mean that you have to push that out, right? Like my practice in looking for this deeper sense of well-being does not push my children further away because they are now a form of attachment. It actually just makes my love for them more and more and more. I think that compassion seems to also naturally flow out of the space that you are trying to get into, right? Beyond the dualities, right? So there's a space there. Things seem to emerge out of empty space sort of miraculously. But in that empty space seems to be, as far as I can tell, like completely diffused with compassion and love for all beings. Right? So it also increases your love for your own children, in my experience, but also for all beings in general. So just a little bit of word on a little bit of note on the practice, right? I sort of had this in here from resilience, from the standpoint of resilience, right? Resilience, like you said, is standing sort of in opposition to some degree, right? And withstanding. But even what you were saying, talking about with Dana, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite resilience. It's almost, if you get a step deeper than resilience, you get into something that resembles more acceptance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something more into equanimity and sort of, love per se, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
for all of experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? It becomes less of a battle. It becomes less of an idea of like stoically sitting and standing through it, but actually sort of in some ways celebrating that like all experience can be regarded as equally valid and worthy of experiencing in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, we, through our experience, we've certainly been confronted to varying degrees of intensity and frequency with this idea of impermanence and death. And, it's sort of created, the fact that she has an illness that, various experts in the field have essentially told her is terminal, has sort of viscerally, on a visceral level, has forced us to confront this idea of impermanence. And I think in certain ways it absolutely has fostered in both of us an appreciation for the moment and not taking any moment that we have together for granted. For us, we feel very connected to one another, but also connected through our connection to a larger purpose. We have this practice of just kind of, I mean, it might sound corny, but, just kind of like we try and begin and end each day with just like holding each other. And there's this sort of, we both feel this ineffable type of energy that kind of flows through us when we do that. And it feels like we're, in doing that, we're sort of plugging into what seems to us to be this kind of like almost like source energy. We both feel like replenished and it's a restorative practice for us. And again, it gets back to this idea of connectedness and meaning. And, so much of whatever that connection is escapes words and conceptualization. But I think one thing that I have been able to sort of distill from it that I could articulate is, we are connected to something larger than ourselves. And I think that's this idea of meaning and meaning as a means toward resilience in the face of suffering and inevitable death and decay, is connectedness to something larger than oneself.
From a practice standpoint, right? As far as like a practical thing that people can do. And I know for a fact that, my practice has made me so much more resilient psychologically, emotionally, even physically. Right? Like, if I could say anything in these times as these are happening, is to really work on having, like you're doing, you're describing a practice, right? You guys have a practice, and that's an everyday thing that you're doing. And I think that is meant to tap into this source, right? I think any recommendation that I can have for people would be to find that practice in your own life. Yeah. Right. And now seems to be about as good a time as any to do that. We have more time at home, more in some ways, probably more free time if we don't, deciding on how we want to fill it. So I think there's a chance here to simplify a little bit and probably decomplicate. And I think that's partly what's happening with all, the civil unrest, the protests, sort of what's happening, in the world. It's like when things started getting stripped aside, right? Less distractions, not as much sports stuff, not as much work, I got to take care, it's just, and as that started to fall away, like what rose was like, well, what is it all about? Like, what is the meaning? And then, out of these horrible acts that people then witnessed with very little distraction, it's not like you could watch this thing with George Floyd and then just like, oh, I'm going to watch a Knick game, right? Like it was just much more just stuck, stuck with us. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's, and this is something truly beautiful and meaningful that's coming out of it. Now, how it all
Yeah.
comes to be, and that we can't know. But this same thing, I think, that can happen in each of us if we can take this moment to simplify, like you're saying, and look at what is this most vital, important piece, aspect to my life, and investigate it. And
Yep.
I think, a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, I think that these are great ways to do that. I mean, there are other ways, but it does take some
Mm-hmm.
contemplation, and it does take a little bit of mitigating, or at least watching what we bring into our thinking, what we bring
Mm-hmm.
into our lives. So anyway, I think we got to probably wrap up, but
Yeah.
I think this has been a really great talk. I think we've explored resilience from many different angles here. And I think just by you sharing Dana's story, I think it's just very powerful. I mean, I know Dana, and she's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful person. It gives hope, right? I think
Yeah.
Dana gives us all hope, that there is something meaningful, and
Yeah. I mean,
we're all better than we think we are.
well, yes, and it's her story sort of speaks to um, kind of the opportunity and sort of the responsibility we all have to find meaning in our experience. She could have made the choice to just dwell on how unfair, the cards that she were dealt are, and why is this happening to me, and in several a number of objective ways, she has ample justification to be miserable. And
Mm,
had she taken that path, I don't think she'd be alive right now.
mm,
But instead, she finds a way to to focus her awareness on the meaning of her experience. And there, she wrote this beautiful letter I'd love to share with you one day, like, to her pain, and the way it's been such an important teacher to
mm,
her. And a lot of it boils down to this idea of being present.
mm,
And it's kind of forced on her this mindfulness practice, because
mhm.
when you're in that much pain, like, you have no choice but to be in the present moment.
Yeah.
And so, she's found ways to really take her experience and use it as a way to generate meaning, rather than to dwell in what could otherwise be experienced as just like the horrible sort of random cruelty of a meaningless universe, which
Yeah.
I think is we don't have time to get into this, but that is something that really plagues us as a society. This
Yeah.
reductionist, materialist worldview that tells us that nothing really means anything. It's all just billiard balls,
Yeah.
and we're all just accidents. I
Mhm.
think it's a very corrosive worldview, and something that maybe subject for another talk.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely do another talk. And thank you for sharing, and tell Dana I said thank you so much for her words, and for
Well,